NFL Conference Championship Week, and I'm here with Ron to have an informal conversation about what transpired during the divisional round and what we're looking at for this coming round. And that was kind of hilarious trying to get on here on time. So, how's it going?
Oh, I don't know. I feel like many of the teams in the NFL survive in advance, barely getting here. And I think a lot of the teams last week had some scares, had some moments. I think dissecting last week's games might be more challenging and more exciting than usual because there were mistakes made. There were strange plays. There were left curves. There were about faces. A lot of good stuff last week.
I was pleasantly surprised. I think all the games were watchable, had some intrigue to them, and I agree with you. There were there were some surprises. There were some good performances, surprising performances. There was change of play and shifting of what you thought was going to happen, and everything. Actually, most of the weekend was actually unexpected, wasn't it?
Yeah, what's interesting is that whatever we take away from this weekend as we talk about it this past weekend, teams are going to make adjustments. I'll mention that when we talk about the Lions. The Lions made adjustments. A couple of the other teams made adjustments and moved on. One of the teams did not make an adjustment and didn't move on. But it's almost a feeling out process for some of these teams. And we're going to find out that teams that barely survived this past week are going to have to make changes to survive and get to the Super Bowl.
Well, let's go game by game. Houston, Baltimore. I was surprised that Baltimore seemed to come out a little flat. I thought Houston was definitely in the game and had me a little bit worried. I was heavied up with the costly Baltimore to win the game, and but they pulled it out in the second half. What do you think was going wrong with Baltimore early, and what went right in the second half?
Yeah, if you take Houston, you take Green Bay, you take Tampa Bay, you take teams that, in my opinion, had nothing to lose. So they came out fresh, ready to go. What Baltimore did defensively is they stopped Houston cold. And then Baltimore still, maybe with a little bit of jitters, I don't know what it was, but they needed to make adjustments to go in the second half, and they did that. That's why Todd Monken was there, to erase the memories of the past and get Baltimore to play on another level. Lamar Jackson made some suggested changes at halftime. Todd Monken agreed with it. Basically, Houston didn't see the ball very much in the second half. If you look at it, one of the props I had that lost was Stroud over, I think it was 34 and a half attempts. And in 22 minutes, he had 32 or 33 attempts. So he was well on his way, but they just couldn't get the ball. Actually, they did have the ball the last 2 minutes, but they chose to run out the clock. So even then, it could have been a backdoor prop cover. But basically, back to the game, Houston's success on the ground did not carry over to this game. With Lamar Jackson, with Justice Hill, and with Edwards, the big surprising thing for me in this game was how Baltimore was able to establish the run to free open the pass.
I thought Houston did have some success on the ground. I didn't really examine that box score.
Yeah, no, Justice Hill ran pretty good. Edwards, Cook, Lamar ran for 100 yards, and Houston on the ground. Of course, they didn't have enough attempts to establish the run, but they didn't really get it going. I thought Baltimore did a good job of controlling the line of scrimmage, with one exception. This was crazy. Baltimore, San Francisco, and Kansas City had one thing in common that you would never guess they had in common, but I'll give you 10 seconds to guess.
Baltimore, Kansas City, and who?
San Francisco.
Had one thing in common. They weren't winning at the half. and they won?
Nope. These are teams. Baltimore, 60 sacks. San Francisco, high price front four. So on. These teams had 0 defensive sacks combined.
Wow.
That's a stunning stat for teams that ended up winning, in Baltimore's case by margin.
Sorry, I was just pulling up the box score on that the first game. I'm unfamiliar with this site, so it's making me drag. Oh boy, yeah, the Houston had no rushing. I just happened to notice Singletary broke off a couple in that first half. I guess they didn't do anything afterward.
They didn't have the ball. 22
No.
minutes for the whole game and not much in the third and most of the fourth quarter. It was it was Baltimore playing keep away. Excellent job.
Those penalties just killed them. I mean, geez, 11 penalties for Houston. I think they had 7 or 8 right off the bat that really put them in a hole. They could have had a really nice first half otherwise.
Yeah, that was I split the penalty props, and that was one where I thought there'd be lots of penalties in the game. And Houston, I think, had a lot of them to start out with. Great run by Houston. I mean, they did a wonderful job. They know they have some missing pieces. You can't fix everything all the time. Lamar was 16 out of 22, so he had people that were available to him in terms of in the pass game. But the idea that they were able to set up the run and move Jackson outside of the pocket really changed the course of the game in the second half.
He was getting a lot of crap on social media during the first half, that same old Lamar, what's going on here, blah, blah, blah. And the second half was a tale of 2 different halves, obviously. So do you think, did you think he was off his game early? Were you worried a little bit about whether it was the moment was a little rough on him, or just was it rusty? What do you attribute the slow start to?
I think it was a game plan that wasn't working and they would need to make adjustments. I think I mentioned it at halftime. I said, this is about Todd Monken now. He needs to make adjustments because what he was doing wasn't working. I don't necessarily think Lamar Jackson was tight because he's not built that way. He's kind of built a different way, and that doesn't get to him. It's the media that talks about it that way. I just thought that the closer the game was, it was still going to be in doubt because Stroud could make one easy long throw against the Baltimore defense and it could change everything. But the bottom line is Baltimore did make those adjustments and the game went as many would have guessed at the beginning.
I think one comment I think to make on this is I think Houston deserved to be there. I thought that they were legitimately a pretty darn good team. And I think Stroud's the real deal. But this is a team, and we talked about it before the season started, a lot of veterans. And what that means is a lot of free agents. And there's probably going to be a fair amount of turnover possible on this team. So something to just keep an eye out, that you can't automatically assume that all this stuff carries forward with Houston. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you have raised a number of comments in my head because those are great points. First of all, Houston's going to have the first place schedule now. So that changes things in terms of schedule difficulty versus the rest of their opponents. Secondly, I do not believe they have a first round draft choice. I could be wrong on that, but they traded up to get spots 2 and 3 in the draft. So I think they're not going to have as much draft capital. Number 3, there's going to be tape on CJ Stroud. As good as he is, all coordinators salivate over having a full season's game tape. So Houston has to be better just to be the same next year. Promising start for D'Amico Ryans. I think they can pull off a lot of stuff. But yeah, the expectations may not match the record next year based on these variables.
So look, they could be looking like Jacksonville this year.
Could very well be. I mean, it's not a runaway in terms of that division. Indianapolis will have a full complement of picks. Jacksonville had 13 picks or so last year. Tennessee will be under new management. We'll see how that goes. It's competitive in the NFL. And when you have to play the Chiefs and you have to play the Bills and you have to play Baltimore, and your rivals are only going to play one of those teams and you're going to play three of those teams, that's a disadvantage. And a first place extra 17th game from the NFC, number one divisional winner. So that's tough.
So it looks like Hector says that they do have a first round pick with a swap with the Browns. So somewhere around 24 they may have.
I was, in the back of my head, thanks, Hector. I was thinking that because the payment is still going on for Deshaun Watson, isn't it? I mean, they're going to pay through the nose, not only to him, but to other teams. So that's good for Houston, because actually the way Houston finished the season, Arizona's pick that they got from Houston, they didn't expect it to be in the 20s as well. And that's where Houston's pick is. So it's not going to be that much of a difference from that standpoint. So maybe they get somebody good in the first round. Not a deep draft probably, but Houston could use people at a number of positions.
Well, we'll talk more about Baltimore in a little bit. Green Bay, San Francisco, boy, that was one of the most frustrating games I've ever bet in my life. I could not believe how miserable and unhappy I was. And I was in a situation where I had that game teased, and I ended up winning everything that I bet pre-flop. But because of the way the game went, I had to in-game in ways that to protect against complete and utter disaster if Green Bay ended up winning by more than a touchdown. So a little frustrating that I had to give back some but I wasn't impressed at all. Purdy's played in 2 rain games. They haven't gone that well for him. We saw where he was wiping his hand off in the middle of a play. And it kind of reminds me, some people say, oh, rain doesn't matter. It's the wind that matters. But, I played a lot of tennis and I played pool and I played racket sports. And it was really, I always found it really funny how odd things would really bug me and ruin my game that, other people could care less about. I just had to have I couldn't have certain things a certain way. It was far more disruptive from the way I played. And it seems that way with Purdy and Rain, possibly. I don't know. Any thoughts?
Well, he was definitely bothered by the rain, and I was bothered by San Francisco in general. As many people know, I only had one straight play of the 4 games. Lines get tight, but I am manipulating parlays more, and I did lose this one because I refused to go all the way down to the money line. I wanted plus parlays, plus 140, plus 150, that kind of thing. So I had Kansas City parlayed to Baltimore minus 6.5, to San Francisco minus 6.5, which was a loser, and to the Lions minus 2.5. I'm just manipulating the lines enough because I wanted to get Kansas City to certain places because that was my play. But I honestly feel that San Francisco should have lost this game outright. I mean, you had a pick 6 right in the guy's hand. You had 2 other situations where they couldn't do anything. You had Kyle Shanahan going probably as brain, you would have thought he played or coached for the Chargers the way he manipulated or failed to manipulate the end of the first half, letting a minute 18 or a minute 19 evaporate into a long field goal try without even stretching the field or calling timeouts. He lost 39 seconds between the 40-second clock and snapping the ball at 1 second with 3 timeouts at the time. It was pretty embarrassing, and they were really lucky to get it. The only reason they got back is because, unfortunately for Green Bay, Jordan Love went into that scramble drill. He knew it after the fact, threw against his body, threw in the middle of the field on a first down when they had 2 timeouts left. He certainly wishes he could have that play back. But let me say one more thing about this. San Francisco had a game plan that was obviously designed for Deebo Samuel. It was the first 2 plays of the game. He was completing passes. They were going to run with him. They were going to do all these things to keep Green Bay off balance. And that typically works against Green Bay. When he went out of the game, I think it flustered them in terms of their precision game planning at the beginning. And it took them a long, long time to get their rhythm back, if they even got it back. It was really just a McCaffrey show that got them to this round.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you said there. I don't know how they ended up winning that game. They looked really average, really fast. And that's the thing. When San Francisco loses one of their key players, it just seems like there's nobody else to pick up the slack for that player. It really is more disruptive to them than other teams, it seems. And I'm just shocked at how average they looked. And you knew fast that Purdy wasn't confident. You knew that somehow there was no indication in the least that if they didn't have the uniforms on, they had different uniforms on, you wouldn't know which team is better than the other team. I mean, San Francisco did not look like the better team. So it worried me right out of the gate. And I said, how the hell is this possible again? Because I've been on a lot of these double-digit favorites that seem to lay eggs when I'm on them. And I'm like, this better not happen again. And it almost did, but I don't know. They don't look elite, and I don't know whether it was just rain or just Samuel being out, but they don't look elite.
Well, I'd never seen really a quarterback at this level where his expectations so high miss throws by that much. I mean, we weren't talking about missing by a yard or two. The throws were sailing all over the place, back to the rain or back to whatever. I think it's more than just rain. Something was going on there in that particular game, because he was missing some receivers that were fairly wide open, or NFL quarterbacks would make that throw. And I was a little surprised, and maybe the Debo factor, having Debo in the game frees up Brandon Ayuk for the medium to deep passes. And I thought he would be a factor in this game, and he was less of a factor. Final point I would make, and this is the more concerning one, and why I agree that you had to start hedging in this game, if you had what you had in terms of the volume, is that the running back, Aaron Jones for Green Bay, was from the start very effective. He went 18 for 108, the first running back in over 50 games to get over 100 against San Francisco. And it was not a fluke. He was, really dissecting them, dicing away from the players and so on.
They stopped going to him at one point, right?
I think teams freeze up at the end of games. Buffalo froze up at the end of the game. A couple of teams, they revert to tendencies that you wouldn't expect, where all of a sudden they're not running what got them there in the first 3 quarters. And it was a little too late. That last drive was a mismanaged drive by Green Bay. Instead of getting into field goal position and then shooting for the end zone, they started shooting for the end zone before they were in field goal position. They also let time waste off the clock. And in the end, they relied on a kicker trying to make a field goal at the end of a game in rainy conditions. And when you play for the field goal, that's what happens.
Yeah, I tweeted yesterday, when you have Justin Tucker hitting 86.5% of his field goals, no team should be playing for field goals if he's only hitting that percentage nowadays. So I don't know how those guys do it the way they do, but I'll have some strong comments to make when we get to Detroit, San Francisco.
Okay.
I was surprised Kansas City's defense looked like Swiss cheese. Buffalo was running roughshod over them, and that was completely unexpected. And another issue was the Kansas City offense more of a product of something that they've changed and are doing, or is it a product of the defense that they were facing? And that's what actually works for the last 2 games.
Yeah, well, Kansas City, Buffalo, I got the feeling from the start this was going to be a close game. And that's why I liked the 3 points. And that's why, I made it um, not quite as big as that one last week when they had all the advantages against Miami, just a 2-star game. But I also had the 2 live parlays going. So at that point, I needed it because the props were a little bit down. One parlay had lost. And I had everything riding on KC, even though that was the first bet I made. It turned out to be the last game, and I needed it at that particular time. What I saw from Kansas City is Buffalo's offense was working, and the reason why it was working was the same reason why it was working the last 6-7 weeks. They used Josh Allen's legs. They used their running back in the way they wanted to use that particular running back. He had a lot of carries in the first half. He had 3 carries in the second half. So that's more to the point of teams blowing the adjustments being made. In a close game, they forgot all about the run game, Buffalo. But in the first half, Buffalo was scoring, realized probably at the end of the first half that Mahomes was also in rhythm, that he was going to do some wonderful things. I thought Kelsey would have a big game. More than Rice in this particular matchup. And he did. And so did the backup tight end, Noah Gray. He had a good game as well. Pacheco, how many times have we said that he runs angry? And he was the reason they won the game. But in the first half, Mahomes was sharp. But also in the first half, I thought Buffalo had an exquisite game plan in the first half.
What changed in the second half then?
I think the whole game changed on the fake punt. I mean, the whole game changed, and I think they got into chase mode, and they know they almost got behind 10, but we had that little fumble rule. It was the correct call. We could devote some time afterwards to talk about that. But basically, Kansas City, doing nothing wrong on offense, hadn't punted at the time, I believe, was about to go up 10 points and throw Buffalo out of rhythm. They didn't go up 10 points, but Buffalo did not act like they were in a ball game. They changed their scheme. They started to throw deep. They forgot about the run game. A lot of things changed on both sides of the ball, and I think that whole fake punt thing was unnecessary.
Yeah, I thought that was ill-conceived, to say the least. And then there was the other situation where Josh Allen sitting there throwing deep balls when they really just needed short yardage and clocks. It was strange, and
Yeah.
I don't understand it. That was just really bad choices there.
Played into Kansas City's strengths, and I don't understand it either. In the end, instead of making it either a shorter field goal or putting them on the ropes where you can do one of those 15, I mean, they could have got to the 15, 20-yard line just by running the ball, have a couple plays for the end zone, and then kick a 30-yard field goal. But that field goal, the distance mattered because you saw the way that curved off at the end.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. That was a game that was the only game. That was the only time I think this entire season I was watching the game by myself that I actually screamed with glee like Gizmo is. Shh.
I was gonna mention that if you didn't. I said we saw a different side of Cris in the text that you sent me or whatever. And it's funny because I would sometimes pump my fists or something when something happens. I just kind of sat there numb because I was moving beyond that field goal thinking, okay, Kansas City has a minute and a half to go. Mahomes will get him
Right,
down.
exactly.
Can you get the 3 points? And when he missed, it was like, wait, he missed. I didn't know how to process that for a split second.
Yeah, that was gin rummy for me. I had both teams bet on teasers both directions, parlays both directions, and I've got a huge Kansas City future, which have to figure out how to hedge a Kansas City future to win the AFC the most optimal way possible, trying to extract every last dollar I can out of it. So that's going to be the task of the week.
Well, that's something I do want to brainstorm later on, in the show, because I have one of those futures too, because This wasn't me saying something and then you betting it. This was you saying something and me betting it, because you brought up the whole topic. You asked me right live on this show, where do you see the value? What would you make KC? And we brainstormed it. And basically I said, Cris has a good point.
Yeah. We're sitting in Fat City now. So, yeah, but Buffalo's time of possession, 15 minutes more. I mean, that's significant.
Yeah.
And then you have to worry about Kansas City having, one less day to prepare for their game. That's going to work against them too. So on the defense longer, and one less day to prepare for Baltimore.
Yeah, the thing about Kansas City that would bother me is the fact they didn't stop the run in either of the first two games. And we know what Baltimore is about. Baltimore would like to set up the play action pass. And what better way to do that if Kansas City has to have one extra guy defending the run in the box? Then you get that play action pass. And there are a couple of injuries worth noting on Kansas City as well. One of their starting offensive linemen is out, and they had, I think it was Edwards, I'm not 100% sure of the name, in the secondary go out as well. So we have to check for injuries. And we have to check again as we get closer to talking about that game, whether we do see tight end Andrews for Baltimore.
Yeah. I think we will. And then, that was the last game. I went in the wrong order, didn't I? So,
no problem.
I guess the Detroit game mapped out sort of the way I thought it would. It was a little close for comfort, but I never got the feeling that Tampa Bay was, that Detroit was in serious trouble or anything like that. I mean, I was disappointed that they don't seem to be able to put the pedal to the metal ever. They seem comfortable with just being close in games, and which is great for experience if you're used to it. But both games end almost in similar fashions, where they've got to do something with the ball. I did not even realize what a horrible mistake Todd Bowles made at the end of that game. I didn't. I mean, a lot of people haven't realized this. They said it was basically over, and the guy doesn't call timeout. He could have had 35 seconds left, and instead he just lets the clock run out. I mean, I'm not sure you can do much worse as a coach. I mean, that's horrible.
Yeah, I was thinking it must have been a graphic problem. Maybe the graphics said one timeout and they didn't have a timeout, because there was no other reason in a win or go home situation that you would ever do that. Force them to actually hand off instead of kneel down, because on the first play, when I saw the one timeout, I was actually surprised, and I mentioned it. I was actually surprised that Detroit did a kneel down at that particular time, because I was looking at the clock and saying, well, they're going to have 30 seconds or whatever if they don't watch out. And then on the second play, when he does a kneel down, he does it with 15 seconds left on the clock. He didn't even run it down to 40 seconds. So I was thinking, well, maybe they just know that they don't really have a timeout. So it was a surprising turn of events to me. You make them hand off 3 times. You don't make them kneel down.
Yeah, just strange. Detroit played well. They got dinged up, in a few places. It was strange that I shit the bed with player props, because what really pissed me off is what's his name got the first touchdown of the game, and I was thinking of playing him, Johnson.
Yeah, you mentioned it to me.
Oh God, I texted you in the morning, and I didn't end up playing it, and I'm just banging my head against the wall. And I sensed that Montgomery was never going to get that touchdown after that first carry. He got stuffed, near the end zone. I got a feeling he's not going to see another opportunity. And I should have been playing Mike Evans props, and instead I got distracted with Goodwin, and whatever could go wrong with player prop decisions did for me, basically.
Well, I was slightly down on the props too. Kansas City helped me there too because I was a little bit more down on the props. The one prop that I won that I shouldn't have is one of the mistakes Tampa made in this game. White, their running back, was running well. He had 55 yards. I had him both under 55 and a half and 56 and a half. I think it opened 59 and a half and closed 54 and a half. So it was all over the place in terms of where you could get it. So I had him under the 55 and a half and 56 and a half. He didn't see the ball much in the fourth quarter at all. And Tampa was still in range where you could run a draw with him because his yards per carry, he was fresh. His yards per carry had been good the second half of the year. His yards per carry in this game was also good. But I want to give Detroit a little more credit than you do because the first week, remember when they sat on the ball in the second half?
Yeah.
Goff didn't sit on the ball in this half. They still aired it out. He threw the ball 38 or 39 times. They learned from that. And I think that's the lesson that other teams can take in their first game this week. Detroit made adjustments and they kept the pedal to the metal for the most part in the second half. And Tampa Bay played a wonderful game. Mayfield played to his level. Evans played above his level. We know that. White played well. Tampa played well, but Detroit's the better team.
Well, there were some screw ups. They could have obviously thrown the flag on the Baker Mayfield sack, what would have been a sack, and they did not throw the red flag, and then the next play is a touchdown. So that was bad. The end of the first half management was ridiculous. It was just, what are you doing? So you gave Tampa Bay enough time to come back and score a touchdown. You're snapping the ball before the 2-minute warning. You're throwing passes. I don't know what the hell they were thinking. So, and there was something else that wasn't good about some management. But no, I agree. They tried. They were a little bit more aggressive. They didn't sit on the ball as much as they did against the Rams. I think the last thing I want to say about this game is I think Tampa Bay was very underrated. I think they were not healthy much of the season. They came into this game healthy, and they were a tougher opponent than people realize. They were not a pushover. They actually had a pretty darn good defense. And when you've got the healthy receivers and a Mayfield that isn't throwing picks, that's a tough team to beat. So, just the vision of the whole season made it seem like they didn't belong, but I think that they technically did belong, and it was a decent victory.
They were more cohesive, more veterans, didn't do things that New Orleans did offensively with no offensive game plan, with Atlanta, with their coaching situation. They took advantage of their division to win their division. They have some tough decisions to make in the offseason because it is a veteran team and they could lose a few of those players. And we talked about Houston's first place schedule. Tampa has the first place schedule this coming year. So we cannot assume again that they're going to just automatically build on this. This could be a problem. It's something to think about for next year. One thing about Tampa is they blitz a lot and they bothered Goff a little bit in the first half. But again, let me say that Detroit made some adjustments in the second half and they threw the ball out quicker. Goff was not bothered as much in the second half. He had some easy completions against Tampa's secondary. And when the blitz doesn't work for Tampa, that's what happened. So let's give credit for Detroit for making some adjustments as well.
Oh, I forgot. That stupid Goff passing yardage went over like on the last drive. They had the ball. I was looking in game and wondering whether I should get off it. And the in game, when I looked, was it like 210 or something? And he goes over by just a handful of yards. So a little frustrating there. And another turnover-free game for Goff. I don't know how many in a row that is, but he's in a nice run there. We'll have to see what he does outside.
Yeah, the in-game props are kind of interesting. One of the things that I had written about last week, may have talked about it on Friday, I'm not sure, but I said I had Baker Mayfield's pass attempts over, and I wanted to see if they got behind, because if they got behind, that would continue to be the case. But if they were playing ahead, if they got ahead, then they would run their running back. Then they get conservative and into a shell. As long as they were behind, and the in-game allowed me to go ahead and play a little bit more on Baker Mayfield over, because for whatever reason, they didn't adjust that, and they didn't adjust the fact who received the second half kickoff either.
Well, I see the markets have been moving. So game number 1, Baltimore, Kansas City. The market has moved and the threes are gone pretty much. Or the threes are stronger. But it seems to be firming up as we speak. So the money line was 166 an hour ago at DraftKings. It's and 170 most places. Now DraftKings is up to 175, and we're looking at 180s most places, and a little bit more, firm of a 3.5. Any first impressions on where that line sits?
So this is worthy of discussion on a number of factors. Number one is I've read and kind of scrolled the comments a lot about where this line could be going, and I've gotten pushback both ways. It seems like there will be some public money on Mahomes late, but is that true? I mean, I'm just trying to flesh it out as far as what to recommend, because when I did my power numbers, I came up with a number that is not 3. Let me just put it that way. I think there was value on Baltimore -3 in the line. And so normally when I see that kind of value, I think, okay, the line's going to adjust to 3.5. The line may even go to 4 based on my number. But then I think about it, well, this is Mahomes. This is a title game. Maybe the number ticks. And a lot of people think it's going to end up even a soft 3, I heard one person say. So I don't know where it's going. I think if it gets to a clean 3.5, there's going to be some Kansas City money. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I saw some. Well, I watched as Bet Online opened it at 2.5, and I couldn't get in there fast enough because that was
Wow,
I thought that was ridiculous. I mean, I was flabbergasted that they would put out 2.5 out there, but
wish I would have seen that one.
What?
I wish I would have seen that one.
Yeah. So you had to be pretty quick, and then there was a 47 on that, so I couldn't bet on that fast enough, and I think we were looking at 44.5, 44 now, and I think it could even keep going. I thought the line was low. I think we talked about it Friday in our line prediction. Didn't we say 4.5?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I said 4.5, but I'm sure I said 3.5 or 4. I'm sure I didn't say 3 at the time, because my numbers could never get it to 3, and I believe my numbers are closer to 4.5, 5, to be honest, in this particular game, based on the way the power ratings played out. We expect rain in the forecast. At least that's what I saw.
I still haven't seen the weather. I know that I thought I heard both of these games may see a little bit of rain, but I thought the weather on this one is supposed to be like 43, no big deal.
Yeah, winds. I mean, I hate to do weather reports 7 days in advance, although they technically are a little bit better on East Coast versus West Coast as predicting weather. I think the winds were only supposed to be around 10 miles an hour, and that's going to be nothing for NFL players, with pads and everything and so on. Might be something for me, but it's not something for them. But it did seem to say that it would be raining consistently during the day, not necessarily a heavy rain. So we'll just have to monitor that. Yeah, my first impression is nothing to do with the rest differential in this game. It just has to deal with the fact that Baltimore is going to be a tough team to defend for Kansas City if they're having trouble versus the run.
this is what you want to chat about your Kansas City future.
Yeah. Okay. So we both have the future in terms of whatever it was plus 450, plus 500, depending on when we got it and stuff like that.
615,
So
buddy.
615. Okay. I do not have 615. Good for you. That was good moving because I bet it after the game, after our show. So maybe some people knocked it down because I don't recall getting anything over 5. I'll have to check my ticket, but I definitely didn't get 615.
I grabbed it at Circa, and I didn't see anything above 5.5 anywhere else. It was mainly like I even saw stuff in the 4s, like 475. I think MGM had. I think Caesars had 500. I think I saw a 550, but that 615 was pretty favorable. That's one of the reasons I went pretty heavy on it.
Yeah, no, I didn't even get 550. I have a little bit on 525 and a little bit on 5. So I'm much lower than you, but it did grade out. We talked about it, grade out at like 4.5 to 1 and stuff like that. So if I like Baltimore and I bet them at -3, that is you can still get in trouble with that if the game ends 3 or 1 or 2. So what is the proper hedge? The first thing we have to think of is what's the percentage we think Baltimore will win the game? What's the percentage KC we think will win the game?
Well, here's what I've chosen to do, and you may not function this way well, but I compartmentalize them entirely.
Okay.
So because I think we probably feel about the same way on this game. This line was short. There's not a reason to have a lot of confidence that Kansas City's going to win. We want to monetize our position. So I'm going to bet the game the way I'm going to bet the game, and it's completely separate. And then I'm going to look at the future, and I'm going to extract and close that out as efficiently as possible based on the economics of that bet in itself. And those are just two separate things. I'm not going to worry about it if I have money on Baltimore or Kansas City in the game. I'm only going to worry about the future on its own.
Okay. I think that's fair. So treat the -3 as a separate entity. I think that's the best way to do it. And then hedge enough to decide what we want to do on this. If I imply based on my win probability is that Baltimore should be anywhere between -210 and -233 in this game. So based on what you said earlier, I think you said -160s, -170 is where we're sitting at the money line.
No, it just jumped to -180, 185 now.
Okay. See, the power of the show. That's what happens.
Yeah.
So it's still value. It's not a lot of value if you think it's closer to -210. And of course, there are going to be people that actually take the Kansas City money line because of Mahomes. So I think there's going to be a balancing act as it gets closer to kickoff. I want to get to the position where if Baltimore wins straight up, that I'm going to win money.
Oh, yeah. That's we figured it out. Well, where we are, let's see. I think we can extract about 50%, about 45% of what it would pay in full. We were doing some numbers last night, but it's how many different ways can you do it? So one of your options, you've got the Ravens +200 to win the NFL championship. So you could use that potentially in some form or fashion. You could tease the Ravens to +3.5. And you could tease both sides of the San Francisco-Detroit game. That's an option. There's a pitfall on that though if you push anything. So you can't have a solid number because you can't allow the teaser to push.
Agreed.
It's the one time ever that a teaser push would actually hurt you.
Yeah.
So you could obviously just lay the money line if you found a reasonable money line. Do you have them to win the whole thing or the AFC?
AFC.
The AFC, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
In all the futures I've ever done at this stage prior to the playoffs, I always concentrate conference by conference. I don't think I've ever had it where a win Super Bowl. I had one way back, but that was a fluke. That's a story for another day.
Now, the other things that you can do is you can look at what the exactas are.
Yeah.
For the Super Bowl, and you can use those because I'm pretty convinced I'm going to use 2 or 3 different methods. I don't want to just use one method because I can't get down enough on just one method anyway. So I have to use 2 or 3 different methods of monetizing it. But the championship exactas are another thing that's worth considering.
I like that. I like that approach to see what value might be there.
Yeah, it's they're like some options are going to require an additional step. So I mean, optimally, we'd like to close out any hedge immediately if possible and just be done with it. But if sometimes you can find extra value if it's throwing into something that you need to do later that people are too lazy to figure out, that gives you added value. So just trying to explore all those options. And I don't like to see that line going up because it only hurts us at this point.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the easy way out is just to hedge with the money line, take a profit both ways, and be done with it.
But see, here's my motto on hedging. I really hate to hedge and give something up. I want my hedges to be able to win. I want to be able to sweep the board. So that's why a teaser with Baltimore plus 3.5 is desirable into both sides of Detroit, San Francisco, possibly, or some method of parlaying alternate lines of Baltimore getting points. Past that 3, you want it like to the 3.5. So some way, somehow, using Baltimore plus 3.5 in parlays or teasers is something I will absolutely be doing.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I would agree with you at least 90% of the time, and people like yourself and Steve Fezzik and others endorse that you're really, you don't want to create a situation where you're giving money up. You want to ride it all the way through. But on my end, I made this play, or the 2 plays, because I made it the 525 and the 500. I made it on the basis of value. And I did not make it thinking Kansas City would go to the Super Bowl.
So, right. No, neither did I. I mean, I think that they have a better chance. They certainly have a better chance of winning this game than I thought they would.
Yeah.
And I actually thought I would have hedged last week, and I didn't. I said, you know what? I think Kansas City's going to win this game. I'm not going to.
Yeah.
And that's why the game worked out so well, because I had all this. I had some Buffalo and some Kansas City, and shortly before the game, I'm like, boy, I got a lot of Kansas City, and if I lose that future, it's going to be really costly. So I ended up, adding a whole bunch of Buffalo, which ended up being a blessing, and they all won. So, and the future moved on.
Well, I think one of the things when we look back at the end of the year, and you said, and we always look back, you and I do autopsies on the season, you do, and so on and so forth. And we look at what we could have done better, where we faltered, where we didn't see something fast enough. But one of the things I'm going to take away as a proud moment is when Kansas City had that Week 18 situation where they were locked into the number 3 seed, and all of a sudden that whole rest negative differential changed, and they got to rest all their starters week 18. I completely changed my position on KC because I thought they were going to limp into the playoffs, and instead they were one of the strongest teams going in the playoff, especially when you consider who they played. They played Miami, who had so many negative things due to injuries and rest differential of their own and losing the division. And then they played Buffalo, who had snow delays and 2 games off, and they had fighting for their playoff lives every week for the last 7 weeks. It just created a situation, and I really think that pivoting on Kansas City created the fact that, because I would never have looked at this future without that week 18 bye.
Yeah, I agree. The other thing to remember when you're doing these hedges or teasers or things that have a range of winning numbers, and then you hit the one key number that can hurt you, is looking at margin of victory options. And then also you can bet, will Baltimore win by exactly 4 or something? You know, like if I did a 7-pointer with San Francisco pick with Detroit plus 14, I could protect it with just betting San Francisco wins by exactly 14 at like 25-1 or something like that. It's a very small investment, pays a lot. So there's a lot of little different tricky stuff that you can. We're just hitting the surface of it at this point. Yeah. So we've talked about a couple of things already, and there's more. Trust me. So it gets complicated. There's a lot of options.
One final point before we move on to the other game is that, you got the feeling, I got the feeling right away that Buffalo KC was going to be one of those games that's going to be close. But we have seen duds in championship rounds in the past because, again, reminder, it's all or nothing. And if you get behind and we see these teams change out of their mode, we saw Buffalo start to throw deep. We saw Tampa go away from their run game. We saw a lot of different things where they resort to bad things again. You can get one of these one-way things where all of a sudden one of these teams wins by 20, which spoils some of these manipulations. You just have to, I think the whole issue of in-game betting becoming popular now becomes something to an advantage when we can see what's going on in the game and we can manipulate. So some of the things and the strategies you're talking about, which are perfectly great strategies to think about before the game and not after the game. We should also think about in-game too. Well, what happens if the game flow doesn't go the way we charted it out?
Well, I think we talked about it last week, where I was finding a lot of success with this in-game this year, and it was saving my position or saving, more losses than I would have, or making me extra money that I wouldn't have had. And that kind of backfired a little bit this week. I mean, but only from the standpoint that if I hadn't done it, I would have been fine. But I would do it all over again. If I'm going to get absolutely annihilated if Green Bay scores over 7. For example, I had a margin of victory as a backup because I had San Francisco plus 3.5. And I had a margin of victory just because I found a great price on Green Bay to win by 1-6 at over 8-1. So when it looked like that I was going to lose that margin of victory, I had to protect that margin of victory. And I had to protect against, San Francisco plus 3.5 not covering. And I would do it all over again. But if I had done nothing, I would have been better off. But if I would have been, happier having that insurance and at least gotten some of it back. So it depends on your situation. It can be dangerous. It can be very helpful. And the money lines can be real valuable. And it's counterintuitive to be betting against yourself. My perspective is in the in-game, I'm always thinking about what is going to hurt me the most here. What can happen and how do I get damaged the most and how can I protect myself? And the beautiful thing about it is I'm finding sometimes you're on the right side of what you need. So you can put in bets where you're already a winner. Like the line is like, this backfired on the Tampa game too. I had Tampa plus 7.5 yesterday. So it was Detroit winning by 7, and I'm taking Tampa plus 7.5 minus 110 or something in that neighborhood. So I'm technically winning the bet, but I need it as a protection,
Right.
and because I didn't want them to get out of range, and for one of the things I had going, and obviously he goes for 2 and follows that up and lands on 8 and screwed a lot of people. But so you have to always be thinking about, are they going to attempt a field goal? Possibly. Like there's situations where you have to understand that the game line means there will be no field goal attempt going forward. Will they go for 2 or not? If you can come up with a definitely yes or a definitely no, that's another consideration. And another consideration is you can get a better proposition from what they're putting out as for a total rather than the point spread or the money line in your game, because perhaps the total can't go past a certain point, but the point spread could, so to speak. So you got to look at all these different options that you have with protecting positions and what can happen. And it seems counterintuitive to be betting the total to protect your point spread, but you can do that.
Yeah, there's only so many games and the lines get tighter at this point, but it's a strategy session. It's setting yourself up. It's a chess match. It's the same strategy that I would use for season wins. When you get down to the last week and you're sitting with different positions, well, especially if you have a game where you have one side over and one side under and they're playing each other the last game, but you're looking at that and you're looking at these situations. I mean, I wasn't at the point that Auburn played Alabama because Auburn had lost to New Mexico State of all teams, the week before. I was sitting on win or tie.
Yeah, I had that too.
Yeah, but it was still a large position. And because I liked Auburn in that game, in fact, I loved Auburn in that game, I said, I could put $10 on Auburn winning the game. It wouldn't bother my bottom line if they lost, but if I win, it's gravy. And Auburn should have won the game. It was that Hail Mary at the end of the game that, it would have been not much of a difference because I would have got a tie on the season win, but I would have got 10. The money line was huge because the point spread on that game was whatever it was. I don't even remember anymore, 14, 15, 16, whatever it was. So you're just setting yourself up for situations where you control the board, you control the action.
Steve Fezzik tweeted out something about in regard to the volume of betting that's going on in these primetime games and other situations. And he kind of got ridiculed about, how the hell can you not know what the hell you have? And I started to type out something. I go, I'm not even going to go there. But Jeff reminds me, I got no idea what the hell. I mean, I do, but I don't. I'm throwing stuff in so fast, and I'm compartmentalizing different scenarios. Like I mentioned, the margin of victory thing. Well, I want to protect this. And then I might want to protect teasers over here. I might want to protect straight game over here. But I could have all these different things swimming around. Like for each of these, like the Kansas City game, I've got alt lines I'm playing. I've got money lines I'm playing. I had parlays. I had teasers. And they're all doing different things and going different directions. And I don't have time. I do my best to try to track it all down. But while you're doing it, you're keeping your mental notes, and there is room for error, but your experience and your mental awareness should be able to overcome what is not exact in those situations. And I think unless you've been through it and you have the experience, you don't understand how you can do it properly. It just comes from what you're comfortable with. And over time, you learn to do a little bit more, and keep track a little bit more. Do you find yourself in those same positions in the firing line?
Because I'm mostly a straight bet person, No, but with props all the time. And the trick of the matter is, and it doesn't matter whether it's props or whether it's what you're talking about of alternate lines and all these positions and teases, is to understand what your risk is. Because if you intended, and I know you do this, you're making different moves, but you're still making it a 3-star game or a 2-star game or something like that. You never want to get in a situation where you're making all these moves and then looking at your tickets and say, wait a second, I stand to lose 5.5 stars on this game or 5.5 units. You still want to make it the same bet you wanted to do, but you want to create opportunities and situations. Same thing for props. If you start having something and you say, wait a second, if this doesn't happen, it's like I'm going to lose 7 props all of a sudden. You never want to get into that. So you have to have that balancing act.
You have to, I think the number one thing I can recommend is always keep track of the domino effect. As I mentioned with the in-game, when looking at a single game, then I'm looking at what within that game can hurt me the most. If you're looking at a betting card, look at your card and say, what in this betting card am I overexposed to that can hurt me too much or more than I realize? And I think we've all made those mistakes and learned from it, that we have to keep track of it, because certain scenarios can just really ruin a day.
And you have to have discipline in this, because it's not like going to the counter and pulling money out of your wallet and actually seeing it leave your wallet and go across the table to the ticket writer. You're just punching a button. And yep. I know some people have terrible willpower punching a button, and those are ex-gamblers. If you don't have willpower, you shouldn't be punching buttons in front of your computer.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I'm glad they didn't have all these apps and stuff when I was, 30 years ago when, I would have gotten in trouble. I'm going to make a comment that I thought I would be embarrassed to make, but I was thinking about it first of all, I looked at I didn't know I hadn't noticed what my numbers would show for San Francisco, Detroit, before I mentally came up with, I think the line will be 7. And I looked at my numbers at some point, and it's a lot closer than that. And then I started thinking about it, and I looked at the way San Francisco played that game and how average they looked at times, and they don't have an elite quarterback. I'm not I don't give a crap what anybody says. Jared Goff is the number 1 pick. He's been in this league. He's improving. Hasn't turned the ball over in 3 games. He went, 300 plus passes without an interception recently. He gets a lot of bad, and he's properly coached and has an excellent supporting cast around him. I'm not entirely sure that that Detroit doesn't have the quarterback advantage.
I'm sure they do.
I was sitting there thinking to myself, I don't think this San Francisco is really that much better than Detroit. I really don't. And I don't think it's being a Detroit fan. And I turn on Colin Cowherd, and he starts off his show going, you know what? There's a lot of good storylines. The Stroud story, the Lamar story, a couple other storylines that are really good. But when it comes to the Detroit Lions, he says they match up fine versus San Francisco. When you look at those two teams and you look at the caliber of players across the board, San Francisco doesn't have anything on Detroit. And to hear somebody in his stature say that, like literally what I was thinking an hour before, I'm like, okay, so I'm not a lunatic, because I really don't see a major difference between these two teams.
A lot of ways to start with here. Obviously, Detroit belongs. There's no problem with that. Obviously, San Francisco is going to be tasked with making adjustments, just like we talked about. Detroit made adjustments, and other teams made adjustments when they went from one playoff game to the next. I expect, and I think most people should expect, San Francisco should be better than what they displayed against Green Bay, because if they're not, they're going home. There's no question about that. Purdy is a fine quarterback, but Goff is the better quarterback, and that's a fact. I mean, and maybe Purdy becomes as good or better than Goff, but Purdy has 20 some games in the league, and Goff's been to a Super Bowl. He's played at the highest level. He has lots of experience. He has a high completion percentage. So there's not a dispute right now that Goff is the better quarterback over Purdy. One team has Christian McCaffrey and one team doesn't. That's a pretty important statement, right?
That's a huge difference.
Yeah,
but when you're talking about Gibbs and Montgomery are nothing to sneeze at, though.
No, and the way they use them and the way they complement each other, they're not the same running backs, and that's what makes them so effective. You can use them in completely different ways. And again, I don't know how many times I have to say this, but Gibbs was groomed to be playing in the playoffs, and you saw his snap count and you saw his rush touches and you saw everything about it point to the fact that Gibbs is getting more carries now, but he didn't get more carries later because this is now going to be game number 20 for Gibbs. Gibbs has never played 20 games in a season. Even Alabama doesn't play 20 games in a season, where he played his senior year. So now you have a fresh Gibbs who time shared with Montgomery, and it puts Detroit in a favorable position offensively.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the running, Christian is obviously the best in the game right now, and but
yeah,
the running game Detroit has similar options and abilities. It's not night and day difference there. The tight end situation, they added Zach Ertz. You've got Laporte. That's a great tight end combo. What do you've got Kittle? Do they have another tight end? Who's the other tight end there?
They do not typically go with another tight end. They mix up other things. They will use, and I will make a prediction that Kyle Juszczyk will be used in this game on some sort of play inside the 10-yard line.
So which offensive line would you rather have, San Francisco's or Detroit's?
I would say scheme-wise, San Francisco's offensive line is better than they truly are. Detroit's line is a little bit better, but I think San Francisco schemes to keep Purdy out of trouble. So from that standpoint, there's something that, let me see here, Robert said, don't you think that the line coach Campbell will gamble on a play that will cost him a victory? This is my biggest worry in this game. Remember what I've said to you the last 2 weeks. Campbell doesn't have to gamble against Tampa, and he doesn't have to gamble in the other game that he played against the Rams. And true to, I like the way that Campbell managed the game. I'm concerned about how he might manage this game. I don't know what you think.
No, I kind of agree with that. But yeah, see, this guy knows what he's talking about. San Francisco is the number 22 O-line.
But they play differently because they manage it better.
I know. And I'm not trying to say San Francisco is not the better team. I'm just trying to point out, I mean, whose receivers would you rather have?
Yeah, see, I don't subscribe to PFF on a lot of things, so we won't get started on that way. I think they do good. Whose receivers would I rather have? With Debo, San Francisco. Debo and Ayuk is better than what Detroit has to offer.
But Debo, if he plays, he's going to be 50% at best.
We think, but that's what we thought about Laporta, and look what he did.
Yeah.
I mean, Laporta shouldn't have been – I was stunned that he played that first playoff game.
The defensive line, who's got the better D line? Stopping the run. Who stops the run better?
I'm disappointed in San Francisco's defensive line. It seems to be 4 individuals instead of a unit. I think what you have is a lot of try-hard youngsters on Detroit that are playing above their rookie pay grades right now. I worry that San Francisco's scheme is going to take advantage of it. But like I'm going to say, and there'll be an article coming out in the next day or two, what Detroit did in this draft, this 2023 draft, is the sole reason why we're talking about them today.
Dude, they've got Pro Bowl rookies on the squad. They were ridiculed after day one, and they ended up with the best draft in the class, didn't they?
Well, I I think I told you that I didn't like the way Detroit went about drafting their players, that they panicked after Seattle took the cornerback who they would have loved to have. Believe me, the cornerback of Seattle would have fit in perfectly for Detroit, but they got blindsided there and they made some crazy moves. But in the end, it all worked out because they got Brian Branch with their 4th pick when he should have been their first pick. Nobody would have quibbled. I wouldn't have quibbled if they took him at 16 because Brian Branch had a first-round draft grade for me, and I think at least 50% of the respected draft analysts that are out there. How they got Brian Branch with their 4th pick in the draft, second round, but they had 4 picks in the first 2 rounds. That was a steal.
But yeah, I mean, just a healthy discussion. I certainly don't believe that San Francisco isn't the better team. It just surprisingly they're closer than I really kind of even had in my own head, being a Lion fan. I don't trust, as people have mentioned, I don't trust Campbell's coaching decisions. I think he's a rah-rah guy. I think he's excellent. I think mind over matter matters. As somebody brought up, their O-line depends on how Ragnow and Jackson are. Ragnow has come back in 2 weeks from meniscus surgery. He came back in a week from something else, and he should have been out of the game against Tampa. And he said, "No, I'm going back in." I mean, this guy's indestructible. That's the type of passion and that goes a long way to winning, I think, is attitude and passion. But it's a whole different story on the road. As Colin points out, I've left it on the screen. This is embarrassing. 7.8 and 6.8 yards per play. You can't win games like that.
Yeah, both teams are vulnerable to the pass if the pass rush doesn't get there. I love the way the Lions move around their safeties. They blitz. They do a lot of things. But similar to what happened when Detroit figured out Tampa's blitz scheme, San Francisco could do the same. I do expect Ayuk to have a better game in this situation. But I also think the unsung guy in this game, you'll get a kick out of this because you've talked about him a lot more than me. I think the player that has to stand up for Detroit to make a difference is actually a guy we haven't talked about. I haven't talked about much. Jameson Williams. I think he's the important because he can win against the San Francisco secondary. So they have to scheme. They have to get him in the play calling plan. They protect for him. And then Goff, if he's accurate, and he's been an accurate quarterback, has to feature him in this situation.
I didn't realize they targeted him 4 times last time. He made that one beautiful move on that one long pass they needed, the first down, and he did it perfectly. He didn't start off on the right track, but he's on the right track. He had some learning issues or just getting in the flow of things.
Yeah, unsung heroes, and that's what you're looking at. Everybody knows who the superstars are, but if you're looking at a design play for Kyle Hustek on San Francisco, if you're looking for Jameson Williams to be more involved in the offense, I think it's going to be interesting. That's how I would approach the game. Power rating rise, Chris, I don't see an edge. We talked about what the spread would be before in last week's show, and where they are now for me would be 6.5 or a very soft 7. And that's pretty much where the line is.
Just to update, Joshua Jackson had meniscus surgery this morning. He will be out. He's their starting left guard, I believe. He potentially could be back for a Super Bowl. Oh, by the way, I don't want to forget about this. Do you know the last time the Lions won a road playoff game?
Well, I will then guess 1957.
But who did they beat?
Well, am I right on the year?
66 years ago.
Okay, so that's 1957, right?
Yeah. Who did they beat?
So what prize do I win? Who did they beat?
Who did they beat?
San Francisco.
Yes. Who did they beat after San Francisco?
Baltimore.
Was Baltimore around then? They beat the Cleveland Browns, actually.
Okay. Well, they were Baltimore. They
You
were
got
that.
it.
Yeah,
Right.
they were Baltimore.
So, but
I'm winning all the contests today.
they beat the Ravens. So, but and then alternatively, how did this season start?
Yeah, could be first game, last game. Yeah, Detroit and Baltimore.
Kansas City.
All the pegs are in a row for you there. Huh?
Yeah. So one way or another, if Detroit gets through, there's a funny storyline.
Yeah.
But so Joshua Jackson, he's out. Could be back for Super Bowl if they were able to make it. Ragnow's going to play. Trying to remember who else.
Wasn't there a cornerback or a safety that went down a little bit?
Oh, but they picked their tight end is out. They picked up Zach Ertz,
right?
Which he'll be on the practice squad if he's worthy of playing. They'll be able to activate him. So that's what's going on with them. And the latest on Samuel is they're saying 50-50.
Yeah, too early to tell.
I know. I have a feeling it's not 50-50.
But he's going to be in every massage parlor that Deshaun Watson can recommend for him to get ready for this game. One more thing. Any more on this game first?
Just that Hutchinson has been averaging 8 pressures each of the last 3 games. He's got 3 sacks. And there's a chance that Houston will be back, which was his sack partner in crime last season. Yeah. He wasn't able to make it in for Tampa Bay, but you would think if he was this close to making it last week, that he'll be able to make it in this week. What do you think the Detroit pressure? Do you think Detroit can get pressure on Purdy, whether that's going to be anything, or do you think Purdy gets rid of the ball too fast and there's too much vulnerability for him to be able to get it there fast enough and they'll still be successful?
I think it's a cat and mouse game. And I think with Detroit, if you go no blitz, if you change it around and you go no blitz, you get in trouble. And if you go all blitz, you get in trouble. I think you have to pick your spots. Don't play like Tampa. They're coming, so you do different things. There was one play that Detroit did.
I know which one you're talking about.
When they blitzed and Tampa threw right into the blitz and so on. If you do that, if you don't disguise it, yeah, San Francisco is going to burn you. McCaffrey's going to burn you. Somebody's going to burn you on that play because they have those playmakers. You have to disguise what you do, and then the answer would be yes.
And they did a decent job of getting the Baker untouched with these surprise blitzes. So they've got some good scheming. What is Detroit going to be? Isn't San Francisco's secondary is vulnerable, right?
Yes, absolutely.
But how strong is their run game, their run defense?
It's normally stronger than what we saw last week. So I think in general, you want to try to get Gibbs outside and you want to see at first whether Montgomery can penetrate the middle because or you run at Chase Young because it turns out that he's not stopping the run to their satisfaction from what I've been reading about. I was surprised at Aaron Jones' success yesterday. So I think Detroit at least explores that option.
Yeah, that was probably a better way for me to have asked is they were successful with Jones. Are they going to be able to, why was that? And will they be able to fix it? Will Detroit be able to replicate it?
Yeah. So in this particular case, we've seen Andy Reid. We've seen a lot of coaches, Bill Belichick famous for this. When they had that playoff bye, that first game, it was hard to stop them. But this week, you don't have time to make a lot of adjustments. You count the number of healthy people and you move from there. So what you saw might be a problem for San Francisco. So I think Detroit at least should explore the possibility of seeing how Montgomery can run between the tackles.
Well, the only thing I know is I'm pretty darn sure you're not laying 7 in this game.
Well, I don't think I honestly don't think I will be doing anything with this spread, with the possibility if for some reason it went to 7.5, I would explore the matchups more and see about the Lions.
And I'll tell you what really makes me feel old is I was mentioning Scott Norwood yesterday to people that didn't even know who Scott Norwood is, and I'm like, am I really this old?
Yeah. Well, that was I blame Buffalo for that because they set up there. I still remember the last two plays before Norwood, and they basically centered the ball. They didn't try to do anything, and they had this guy kick a 47-yarder back when 47-yarders weren't as automatic as they are now. Kickers have different strategies, different practice routine. I mean, there's so many reasons why. Buffalo basically, and remember in that game, well, you may not remember in that game, but they only had the ball 19 minutes in that game with that Cape, whatever they called it, the Jim Kelly offense and the Giants playing keep away against them and so on. They had the ball 19 minutes in that game. They were moving the ball at will. And then the last two plays before Scott Norwood lined up for the field goal, they basically centered the ball. I blame everybody but Scott Norwood for that miss.
Hector brings up a good point on the San Francisco rushing stats being skewed.
Yeah, that's been a problem for a couple of other teams as well. Even the Ravens, for that matter, when they got out to these leads and teams had to go that way. So I rely more on yards per carry as opposed to how many yards per game.
You know what? I do have a note here. When Jonah Jackson was in the lineup against Tampa, 0 pressures allowed, 18 out of 18 snaps, or whatever the charting is. The guy that filled in for him allowed 7 out of 28. Awasika, I don't know, whatever.
I don't know. It.
But that was really, really bad. So Joshua Jackson Jonah Jackson is a big miss, big difference.
Yeah, good player, highly rated coming out of college, definitely. I want to talk about anything about a fumble rule change.
Well, let me ask. I know what I would do on that situation. What's the alternative? What do you do?
I would probably, I mean, I know it's a hard call, but the defense did nothing to earn the right for the ball. I would say automatic 15-yard penalty, loss of down.
So you put the ball back on the 15-yard line.
It could be it could be even worse. It could be 15-yard penalty from the play where the play started. Or 15-yard penalty from something where the runner was from the 2, then it fumbles out of bounds, it goes to the 17, or 15-yard penalty from the start of the down, something where it's 15-yard penalty, loss of down, but they have the ball.
We did talk about the unused timeout. The alternative to giving the team to the ball to the other team at the 20 is give the ball to the other team on the 1-yard line.
I've heard that mentioned.
That is absolutely the best possible scenario that the defensive team should end up with, as far as I'm concerned. So I kind of agree with you where, okay, you got to put the ball back on the 20 or 15-yard line or somewhere not
loss
close
of down.
To the end.
It has to be loss of down.
Some loss of down or something like that. But if you're going to call it a turnover, stick them on the 1-yard line because that makes it really interesting too. Even the half-yard line. I don't know.
Yeah, that would be, an alternative to consider. I think your dog agrees with that particular statement, so that's good. But it's penalize them for doing that. But I just don't understand what the defense deserved to do it, because sometimes the guy fumbles like he did, reaching from the 2, but sometimes it's after a 40-yard play and he's
Yeah, but see,
reaching for the end zone, and they're rewarding the defense for giving up a 40-yard play.
yeah, but see, the way I look at it is, and you use the key word, and actually, the more I think about it, it makes sense. They didn't do anything wrong, so how can you give them a penalty? That makes no sense. It's the same as a turnover. I say you give the ball to the other team on the half-yard line or the 1-yard line, because how can you penalize a team that did not commit a penalty?
Yeah, I think the rule, something has to change. Let's put it that way. I cannot think that we'll have another season like this. And certainly if Kansas City would have lost, the rule would have been changed. Yeah, Hector brings up a good point. I'm just surprised it wasn't Scantling doing that, but Scantling had already had 2 more catches than I had thought he would have. So he was having the game of his life. Yeah. If Tony would have been in, they could have used Tony. Maybe he could have got offsides on the same play. But
well, he only touched the ball twice and he fumbled both times, right?
Yeah, it's you could fault I mean, the players want to get in that end zone big time to make it from 3 to 10. I understand that. It's a rule that needs to be changed, and I think in some way, shape, or form we'll see something happen.
So we're going to be back on Friday, right?
We'll be back on Friday. We'll have a lot to digest on this game. We'll have other angles. We'll know more about the injury status of some of these players. We'll know how, what their plan. Maybe we'll learn something about Zach Ertz. So yeah, we'll digest everything between Monday and Friday and go from there.
The 6.5s are almost gone. Oh, Nick Dunlap withdrew from the Farmers Insurance Open.
He's got to study.
One-trick pony.
He has some homework to do. I don't think he did his homework last night.
Oh, he missed class.
Yeah.
So, yep. I think I don't see any major moves coming this week on any lines. I think both totals could go down a little bit.
Yeah. We'll check the weather, especially in San Francisco, and we'll go from there.
Okay. And boy, I really wish we could do this on Mondays and there was no Monday Night Football. Tuesday, it's nice coming out closer to when the games just played and the lines are kind of just coming out or fresher,
Yeah, I think because we had so much that we could talk about with these 4 games, it made it easy and better to do it on a Monday. But unfortunately, during the season with 40 or 50 or 60 college games and 14 to 16 NFL games, I know I'm working on Monday in order to get all my numbers in line.
Oh, I know why it was nagging me. Somebody asked about hedging Baltimore and Detroit. I lost that one. I don't have the answer for that because my brain hasn't been thinking about that. So I'm just worried about my Kansas City at the moment. But I don't know what to do quickly. I would just ride out San Francisco. Or no, if you have Detroit too. That takes a little bit more thought. So I don't want to give out a wrong answer without thinking about it. So sorry I don't have an answer for you yet.
Monday line parlay the teams you don't need, and that's a small hedge.
You've got moves because when events start at different times, it gives you options. So
yeah, that'll be a fun one. Save it for Friday. Bye, everybody.
Good luck, everybody. We'll see you Friday.